Hey everybody, this is Rudy Sarzo with Dash, and today's guest, my very, very special guest, is a dear friend of mine, Tom Kapinos. He's the creator of some of my personal favorite shows, especially Californication.
Right.
You know, and White Famous.
That's right.
Lucifer.
Yes, Lucifer.
And, let's welcome him. Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Hey, Rudy. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. As a matter of fact, I want to share with the people that are listening to the podcast how we met.
Sure.
You want to tell them your side of the story? We'll do this kind of like a fair, just like different sides of the story to the story.
Okay. Well, no, you start.
Okay,
and I'll jump in.
Okay.
When you get it wrong.
Okay. Well, this is my version.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was doing Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. I've been doing the camp for about 10 years. And, the first day of camp, I always like to ask, as a reference, what everybody does for their vocation, and because I feel that I can actually relate music, the music itself, to people in different ways. For example, if you happen to be an accountant or on Wall Street, money manager,
sure.
I approach that from a numbers point of view. Numbers. If you happen to be more of a, let's say, a creative side of the brain, then I approach it more from a whole different, angle. Right. Like in your case, I applied it different because you're incredibly creative, right? So everybody's telling me, well, I do this and I do that. And then I turn to you and say, and Tom, what do you do? And humbly, you replied, well, I have this show you might have heard of. It's called Californication. I immediately went over and I hugged you. And I said, thank you.
That's true. You did do that.
Yeah.
But I think you had to pull it out of me because initially you're like, what do you do? And I said, I'm a writer. What kind of writer?
What kind of writer? Yeah.
TV writer. What have you done? And then I said that, and you lit up, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a fun camp.
Because before meeting you, I have been watching the show, and my wife and I, we used to look at each other in certain scenes and go, who's writing this? This person really knows what they're writing about, because usually when you write about something having to do with the entertainment industry, especially music in Hollywood, it's cheese.
Yes.
It's the Hollywood version of what they think that we do is all about. But you nailed it, like nobody else on television ever before. And then I come to learn that you are a musician. You actually came to Los Angeles. Yeah,
many times. When I was 19 years old, I came out to LA for the first time to try and make it. I grew up loving every variety of rock and roll, and I played guitar. And, I had 1 year of college after high school, and I just said, I need to focus on music. And I moved out to LA with my friend Dan, who's a bass player. And we brought our instruments, and we didn't even know exactly where Hollywood was. We just ended up in Redondo Beach because another friend who was a singer had moved out a month or two before that. So we ended up in this really crappy apartment in Redondo Beach. And, I think I had saved up like $1,500. I think my friend Dan had less. And every night we would pile into this, our friend John's truck and make the pilgrimage up to the Sunset Strip,
which was probably about 20 minutes back in the day.
Yeah, it seemed like a long time because I thought coming to LA it was just around the corner.
Yeah,
and I didn't realize it was this freeway trip, up to Sunset. And this was the summer of, I want to say, 1988. So the Strip in 1988 was just a world unto itself.
Can you imagine? Can you try to explain that to somebody who was not there then?
I mean, I remember you'd get off the 405 on Santa Monica Boulevard, and you make your way down to Doheny, and you go up Doheny. You'd pass the Troubadour, which was a big scene, but it wasn't quite what Sunset was. Mm-hmm. So you'd come up Doheny all the way to Sunset, and, starting at... I guess Gazzari's, there was just mobs of people, long-haired guys, girls,
motorcycles
in front of the Rainbow. guys and bands passing out flyers and,
Yep.
and just girls everywhere, and traffic moving very slowly
Yes.
for a long time. I guess until you got to the whiskey, but it was something. And I ended up coming back to LA in '95, and it was nothing like that anymore. So it was really a moment in time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you left.
Yeah. So so long story short, we lasted somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks. Because I realized my friend Dan, his money started to run out, and he just bailed. He's like, I'm going back home. So he booked a flight. His mom booked him a flight back home, and I weighed my options. And I was like, I have a little bit of money left. I don't seem to really understand how I'm going to get a job. It didn't look like the guy whose apartment we were staying in, he was going to last either. So I ended up just throwing in the towel and going back to Long Island, where I'm from. And it was an interesting time because that's actually what sent me in the direction of being a writer. Because I felt like, as a musician, I didn't quite have it. I loved it, but I just didn't have that thing where I knew this was something that I could really do. I think I was more enamored of the idea of being a rock star than actually being a musician. So I said to and it seemed like insanity at the time to throw in your towel, throw in with 4 or 5 other guys and sort of use them to make your way in the world. It just seemed like insanity. I was like, I'm never going to meet the right combination of people. So I started to focus on what are the things I can do by myself. And I loved movies. And, I started to think, I should direct movies. Quickly realized after an internship on a movie set that was shooting in New Jersey that I didn't really like being on a set. So that led me to writing. I was like, I can write alone in a room. No one's going to bother me, and I can do that. So I started throwing all my efforts into that. And so it was a long journey to figure out how to be a screenwriter. But that going to LA and then failing after 3.5 weeks is what led me in that direction.
What was the first thing you wrote?
The first thing, I took a screenwriting class in college, and the goal was to write 30 pages of a screenplay. And I ended up writing the whole thing over the course of it, but it was terrible. It was some kind of drama about a film school student who's very shy but very talented, and he has a roommate who is untalented but really smooth and a hustler, and he ends up stealing the shy kid's screenplay and becoming a success. It was a mess. It was
kind of like autobiographical screenplay?
No, there was nothing. There was nothing autobiographical about it other than that I related to the shy kid, I guess. But it was just god awful. But the great thing was I finished it. Because most people never finish anything.
Yes.
Most people write 30 pages of a screenplay and you can't get to the end. So
yes.
I'm a firm believer that when you start anything, whether it's music or writing, that you have so much bad stuff you have to get out of your system. Yes. And the quicker you can do it, the better. Yeah. And then I finished that, and I think the smart thing I did was I never showed it to anyone really. I probably let my parents read it, the teacher in the class, but I was like, I'm not going to try and do anything with this. I'm just going to move on to the next thing. And the next thing was a romantic comedy in the vein of Say Anything, the Cameron Crowe movie, which I loved, and I'm sure I just did a version of it that was a total ripoff. But again, I think I was the only thing saving grace was I was smart enough to know, I'm not going to do anything with this. So I moved on to the next thing. And that was this like a rock and roll vampire comedy. And that was there was a glimmer of something to it. And that's when I said, okay, it's time to start thinking about moving to LA to focus on writing.
Interesting, because you just basically mentioned the path of a songwriter.
Yeah.
You write your first song, you're not really happy with it, but it's a step, right?
Right.
But then it's a song, you can spend 10 minutes writing a song and say, okay, I'm done with it, I'm not happy, I'm going to move on. A script is different.
Sure.
You spend weeks working with that script.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, months. You spend... all these scripts took, the better part of a month or two to write. And that was, writing at a breakneck pace, just hoping to get to the finish line.
When you say breakneck pace...
Just writing every day, as many pages as you can, hoping that the script will benefit from the energy you're putting into it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I can relate to that when I wrote my book, which is not the only thing I've written, but is the only thing that I let people read.
Sure. Right.
You know, because actually, I wrote the book not about me, but I wrote about Randy. But getting back to what you're talking about, the amount of work that goes into it, I was early on from my writer friends. They advised me to at least write 1 page a day.
Right.
Printable page, published page,
Sure.
not just a draft page. And that was my pace, pretty much.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, after I finished that page, I would read it up, a few times and say, okay, I can move on from that point on.
Yeah, I mean, if I could follow that advice every day, you'd be so prolific. But there's periods of time where the greatest thing in the world is not writing.
Yeah, see, with me it was a little bit different. And I agree with you, because sometimes you have to pull it out of somewhere. I don't know,
Yeah.
But in my case I had a deadline. Once I wrote on my own 3 chapters, and I presented it to a publishing company. And they say, okay, you got a deal. So I had a deadline. And I was on tour at the same time. I went through 3 different bands while I was writing the book, and 2 different laptops.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was, even if I was on the road, I would be in my room when days off, everybody's out there shopping and whatever. Right. I remember one day I was somewhere in Manchester, England, and my room was facing a shopping mall, and there was a guy playing Misty on the saxophone,
right,
over and over again, and that's all I could hear. Right. And he figured people walked away. That's all you knew on this set. And it was hot, so I couldn't close the windows. In England,
sure,
they don't have the best air conditioning, so my windows were slam open, and I'm like trying to finish a page, and I'll never forget that experience. But it was do or die. You have to really finish that book. Commitment, you were talking about. Finishing in something, and that feeling is tremendous.
Yeah, and tying it back to music, that's how I knew I had something with writing, because with music I could never allow myself, I loved music so much that the idea of writing something terrible, it was painful. So it was difficult for me to go through all of the horrible steps and to realize maybe nothing would ever be good. But with writing, I had this ability to go, okay, this is going to be bad. I'm just going to get it out of my system, and I'm just going to move on and keep on moving on until the finished product works. So I just had a much more workmanlike approach to writing, whereas with music, to this day, music seems kind of magical, and I don't quite understand it. Even with my ability, I play guitar, and it's, I have a certain level of ability, but I still don't really, I don't have an ability to write music. I could come up with a chord progression and I don't hear a melody. It's just not, I don't have that thing.
I see a lot of things in the characters that you create, because these are, how the hell you create these things? That Moody, what? There was never been anybody on television like that, or even in film.
Sure.
It's an incredible, complex character. Yeah. It's completely flawed, but it's a character you just help. You can't help but to root for the guy.
Right.
How did that come out?
Well, with Hank specifically, the goal was I looked at movies from the 70s. I looked at, I started to wonder, the period of time when I wrote it, you're talking about 2005, 6, something like that. There was no guy like that in a movie at that period of time. That was the era of, I want to say, there were man-child movies, a lot of Adam Sandler stuff. So I started to think, where is the Jack Nicholson or Warren Beatty of right now? And the goal was to create some kind of romantic anti-hero. And then I just took the basic conception of that character and used him as a mouthpiece for all the thoughts that go through my head on a daily basis. And it was just a great way to vent about experiences I had in, early in my TV career, and he was just this human blowtorch.